Hi, I'm 2021 Why Not Cam Awards winner Chelsea Poe. I'm here to tell you about my cam studio, Treasure Cams. Treasure Cams is a performer-led webcam studio owned by queer porn star Bella Vendetta. We welcome all 21 plus models who want to earn a paycheck from home as cam performers. We're open to all body types, genders, persuasions, and presentations. You get access to our performer-only forums, monthly team meetings, as well as help with promotion and marketing. For customers, check out treasurecams.com to see all of our models, schedules, and photos. treasurecams.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Performers Pod. Today's a little bit different. I'm here with Courtney Trouble. So both my partner and my best friend, Courtney, convinced me to be the guest on the Performers Pod. And I feel like when your best friend and partner are telling you something, you should probably listen to them. So yeah, we're gonna do that special for 420.
I have a hard time imagining I convinced you to let me be the host of your podcast.
No, it was hard for me to be like, okay, I can be the guest. That's the thing, I'm working in therapy, taking up more space. So, probably a good practice in that.
You created such a good podcast. So I can see how after however many episodes actually having like the tables turned on you could be totally nerve-wracking. So
I'm totally good with it. I feel like I've heard everyone's porn story, so now I'm not like, there's just so many stories how people got into porn, so I feel super good about it. I think that's the thing I learned the most about this podcast, honestly. There's just a million stories how people get into porn and reasons for why people do porn and their experiences in it. It's just so varied.
I really think that your podcast was badly needed. And I mean, you haven't even really scratched the whole surface yet, but like the stories that you've collected so far have just been phenomenal. And the world really needs to hear these things.
Yeah, I feel like we just aren't usually given this platform to actually talk about our experiences and what it's actually like to be a performer in like long form conversation. So I feel like for so many people, it's their first like real introduction to who these performers are, who they're actually really big fans of.
Right. And like for what it's worth, porn media tends to be I would say that porn media is usually like pretty flirtatious. It's usually done from a pretty like porny point of view. Like what are your turn-ons and like, like what scenes are you doing this week and like stuff like that. So to like what I like about the performer cast is that you go a little bit deeper and you're getting to know people. And I think that it really adds to a lot of like what porn media really does with the usual interviews. It's just like, what's your biggest fantasy?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I was listening to like a lot of sports media podcasts actually, and there's one specifically called the Women's Sports Podcast where it's a member of the U.S. national women's soccer team, and she just interviews other women's athletes and actually just talks to them from another like athlete's perspective. Because it's a little bit the same with the sports media. You're not actually getting to know the person. It's just like, oh, how did this game go? How about this? What are you going to do in the future with this? Where it's a little bit same with porn, where we're just like, oh, well, what did you do in this scene? Oh, what do you want to do in a future scene? And you don't really get a real conversation. Or, the performers don't really get a chance to be celebrated. Like, there's so many performers I had on who I'm like, wow, you did all these really amazing things. And they're just like, oh, I never really got to think about it. Because when you're in it, you're not thinking, oh, I overcame this giant surgery to get nominated or to win this award. We're usually not given that narrative. So I think just providing that narrative is so important to me.
I agree. And so today we're here to celebrate you, which is very exciting for me. And I want to be I could never be you as a podcast host, but I am going to try to celebrate you in the way that you celebrate other performers. So I've prepared like a little introduction.
That's great. I mean,
So
you've
just
literally been there since the start. I mean,
yeah.
when we met, I was still literally living on a college campus and like in that complete
Mhm.
world. So you got to see kind of everything.
Yep. Okay, so here we are on 420 2022, the Performer Podcast. I am your host for today, Courtney Trouble. And our guest today is the iconic Chelsea Poe. I've tried to narrow down what it is I adore about Chelsea, but it's just not easy. I know her very personally. She's no doubt one of the best friends I've ever had. She's my
Mm.
creative soulmate, right down to the way we pick a font for a film cover. It's true.
That's
Why
so
is it
much
always
about
so
it,
easy?
honestly.
It's so easy with you. I don't understand. We've been through all the highs and lows of porn life together, navigating an industry that puts up roadblocks at every turn, especially for people like Chelsea. You may know her as your favorite podcast host, supplying you with incredible interviews with porn stars you know and love, but this episode is all about her. Here's what you should know about Chelsea Poe. She started her award-winning iconic career as a cam girl who wanted to make submissive lesbian BDSM porn. For trans women, the opportunities for those roles were rare and mostly limited to indie and queer porn projects. Since she started making porn, all of the rules have begun to change. I will argue in part due to her dedication and passion for porn as a genre and the people who make it. When she entered the industry, it was still common to see derogatory terms for trans women littered everywhere. Trans porn was still transphobic, and roles for kinky submissive lesbians were few and far between. Chelsea has slowly but surely carved out a niche for herself, and in doing so has made porn a better place while she's been here. Here's a few of your accomplishments. This year, Chelsea was awarded Cam Performer of the Year at the Why Not Community Awards. Throughout the pandemic, she's screened virtually at over a dozen film festivals. She's officially the first trans woman to be a God's Girl for the now defunct godsgirl.com, a huge accomplishment in alt
Rest in
porn.
peace.
Huge, huge accomplishment in alt porn. In 2015, she was honored by the Trans 100 list for her activism. Before that, she started a petition on change.org that inspired multiple directors and websites to remove derogatory terms for trans women from their marketing. She's been nominated for a handful of AVN and XBiz awards for her performances and has won a few trophies as a filmmaker as well. Fucking mystic, anyone? She works as a professional submissive to this day, a cam performer, and a porn director. She's irreplaceable as a creative director and business consultant at Trouble Films. She's directed and produced over a dozen of her own films for our indie studio project, including Femme for Femme, Queer Porn Americana, and Fetish Fuck Dolls. Her vision as a director is clear: to create sapphic queer content that respects femmes and centers trans women. Her work is inherently political, with one release, Fucking Against Fascism, being a love letter to the activists and Antifa energy in the queer porn scene. Chelsea creates passionate porn that caters to us, and it's some of the most beautiful indie porn I've ever seen. She's exceptional on set because she knows what she wants, prepares for it, and has creative goals that she's setting out to achieve. She's an athlete and an artist.
Mm.
Chelsea, I feel blessed to
Thanks.
have been a witness to what you've accomplished. From the making of your first film, Fucking Mystic, to your everyday dedication to camming and porn. I don't know how you do it. I don't know where you find the energy. I'm personally so excited for your listeners to actually get to know more about you.
Oh,
So,
that's like the best hype up thing ever. Oh, that was so sweet.
and
Yeah,
it's
it's
all
really.
true.
Oh,
So how did this happen? You're just a good old Midwestern girl. Where are you from? How did this happen? How did you get into porn and not like Why aren't you like a counselor somewhere? School, like where are you from?
Yeah,
How did you get into porn?
I'm from Holland, Michigan. It's I lived between there and Grand Rapids, which is like 30 minutes away my entire life. And basically I like graduated during the recession. I didn't really have many opportunities being a trans woman to like get employed anywhere. So I kind of got into camming through there, and even early camming, I just didn't really know what it could be. I was like not super stoked about it, but it wasn't until discovering like stuff like Sasha Grey and Stoya, and then later like the rest of queer porn, probably a few months later, like Crash Pad and Trouble Films, that was like, wow, there's actually stuff I can do with this. So much of it early for me, like going into camming, is just like, yeah, just doing it because I really needed money and like the real survival aspect of sex work. And then it wasn't until I saw Jizz at Grand Valley State in Allendale, Michigan, that I I like got into this whole world. And then I got booked like I think a week later after meeting Jizz, and you were my scene partner with Dylan Ryan. And that's how our whole friendship started. That's just so crazy. That was my first shoot. And honestly, no, it was my second time in California. I went once to San Diego in like high school, but first time to the Bay for sure. And yeah, just like honestly not knowing anything going into it. I was saying like off a market. And yeah, I just had no idea about anything here. I had no idea of what to even expect with San Francisco, to be honest. Like I didn't know where the Bay was, what the Bay was. All I knew was like, oh, there's a few queer porn studios here and I can do a mainstream gig. And yeah, that was 9 years ago last week, I think.
Wow, congratulations on 9 whole years since your
Which is
first trip to
so
the Bay.
long. Yeah, I
How
mean,
many
on
trips to the Bay did you take before you moved here?
only two. I feel like the Pride, I came out here for Pride, and it was the year that gay marriage was passed for California. So it was like a very big celebration and all of that, and people were partying and everything. And yeah, it was just such a great experience. We shot our first scene with Asia Pop, which was an amazing experience. And yeah, it was just such a great first shoot. And I shot some other stuff here that was mainstream stuff that was definitely way sketchier, and being like, I don't know if I'm really down for all of this. And a lot of the stuff was faked, and it just like didn't feel like a thing that I was really fully behind. So since the start of porn, I wanted to, obviously I knew queer porn was gonna be my main genre, but I also didn't want to just be a queer porn performer. I wanted to also have some effect on mainstream porn and try to make it a better place. Because even from the start, I'm like, I feel like it would just be a waste just to stay in queer porn. Because I feel like the generation before me in porn, like the trans women who I was inspired by, because honestly, I didn't watch a lot of trans porn, like especially I didn't watch any mainstream trans porn. There's no reason why I would, because it's not for trans women and it's not for lesbians. It was so straight back then. So like seeing what Toby was doing, Toby Hillmeyer was just doing it ourselves, and it was just okay, we're just gonna do it on our own, which I feel like at the time was so important to build that up. But I was way more interested in like what Drew DeVoe was doing, that was trying to make a alternative and actually be in lesbian porn and get nominated for like awards and do all that stuff, and like have be in an AVN nominated lesbian scene as a trans woman, you know? So that was like the shit that was really inspiring to me. So after I came back from Pride and we did that whole scene and everything, I also found out about Nika Noel's trans romantic at the time. It was all straight, but like I lived with I think two other trans women at the time, and one was straight or was more into men, and was like, holy shit, this is amazing, even though it was like very straight. It was like, oh wow, there's actually starting to become like acceptance for, like treating trans women like normal people in porn.
It's hard to imagine that there wasn't even like a romantic like genre in trans porn
Yeah,
up until like Nika Noel. Like you couldn't even
that's
find a trans porn scene that was like romantic.
that was even okay. That wasn't like, oh
Yeah.
my God, oh, you're
It was
trans,
like
what the fuck? You know?
it was hard to find a porn scene where like it was just okay.
Yeah, or not talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
And
it's
that's like
like,
even when introducing you, I'm all just like, you've become all of these things, and it's like has nothing to do with like your gender, or like your gender perception, or like how you were born
yeah.
or raised, or anything. Like your interest in doing lesbian BDSM porn, period,
Yeah, that's from
is
like
very
definitely
interesting.
that's
You
definitely
know?
from Sasha Grey and Belladonna and Princess Donna at kink.com, what they were doing at the time.
Yeah.
So when I came out here to do those shoots, I was hanging out with a bunch of kink.com people. I was hanging out with Jacqueline Woods and Coral Aorta the
Hmm.
whole time. I wish they were both still around in the porn world. I feel like people just kind of disappear and then you're like, oh my God, I wish I could tell you what was going to happen in porn after that. Because like when I came out here, I was talking to Jacqueline Woods and she's like, yeah, Kink won't book any trans women as subs. And this is what I've been working on. This is what Mandy Mitchell's been working on since Kink came into the armory, and they're basically refusing everyone. So I like put in an application when I was out here. And I don't know if it's true. I really want to get her on the podcast to find out about how much this is true. Apparently, someone told me they're like, well, Miss Berlin decides who gets accepted into all of this. So like before I was just camming for like Chatterbait and stuff and honestly just struggling to pay rent in Michigan. Like there were some months where it was difficult. Or rent was late or whatever, just because I wasn't making that much just camming through whatever campsites at the time. So when I did get accepted into Kink Life, everything changed. It went from making like $50 a day on cam to like 250. So it was like a very big jump where it was like, whoa, my rent at the time was only like $100. So I could pay like 3 months of rent after like a day or two of camming. So I was able to save like, I think like $1,500 or something to move out to the Bay and pay my first few months rent. And I was really lucky to find kind of this like dream home situation in Oakland where I first lived that was a very nice like family style home where like I'd bring dates home and they'd be like, "Oh, do you live with your parents?" It was like no, just an older some older queers who I lived with. I mean, you were in that house often. Like you felt it. It totally felt like a grown up house for sure.
Yeah. Even I felt like a child in that house, and I think
Yeah, right?
I was probably pretty close to the homeowner's age. We're kind of from the same sort of queer scene.
Yeah, they were a
See,
little bit
now
older
we're
than
getting
you.
very personal right now. We're
Yeah.
talking about like who we know in Oakland. But
Yeah.
anyways,
But I feel like that was so much about it though, too, though, that
yeah.
I like moved into this place and was so stable. And at that time I had really stable rent. So when I was like going into this, I was obviously camping remotely, but then it was literally like I came out here to move out here. I only went to Oakland once to shoot in a hotel room. Like I've never went to Oakland before that. It was just like, well, I guess that's where queer porn people are. So I'm gonna move there. And basically everyone lived right around like within 3 blocks. It's come up on this podcast a lot. Like Susie Q lived right there. Like everyone lived within like a 10 block radius at the time, and everyone was making queer porn.
I remember I was riding my bike over there.
Yeah, 100%. I would walk over to
Yep.
where Trouble Films was doing shoots, and it was just so,
Hmm.
and you would be passing by like, oh, that's where Nikki Silver's shooting today. Oh, that's where Susie's shooting. Like it was just really everyone was right there and everyone was going to all the same parties and everything. So I had a bunch of shoots my first weekend there because I originally bought the ticket not knowing I was going to move. That's how kind of sudden it was because I was like, oh, I have some shoots booked for December. I still had the return flight. I'm like, if shit's really bad here, I can always just fly back because I didn't. I found where I was living off of Facebook, off of like some queer Facebook groups. So I was a little apprehensive about that. But so I had all these shoots. I think I had in the first 4 days of living there, I think I had 3 shoots. So it was very like all in a row. And then the next Monday, I had my first day at the Armory, which was very intimidating because you're like literally walking into a porn castle and you're like, oh, I'm here to cam.
And weren't you were like one of 3 women brought
Yeah, one of 3
into.
trans women. Yeah.
Will
So
you
there
talk
was,
about like that experience of like being chosen or cast, and you, because you mentioned like it, like there is a casting process, but like you had a very interesting thing at kink.com.
yeah. So at the time, I don't I don't think they accepted all cam models, so they were very much chosen. And the way
And
it,
they paid hourly. Like they paid hourly
oh
at
no,
this
not when I
time.
worked there. Not when I
No.
worked there. No, they got rid
Okay.
of that, which sucked. Kind of though. So you could like hear into other girls' rooms. So someone could be making bank and you could be having the slowest cam day, which was so
Oh
depressing.
God. Oh, yeah.
That's hard.
That would have an effect on me for
Oh, it
sure.
definitely does. It
What
definitely
was it
did.
like camming like with everyone like that?
So it was really like I would compare it like getting in like recruited by like a college, like for like a sports program or something, because there were like 3 of every type of performer. So like when I started, there was like they would hire 3 blonde girls, 3 brunette girls, um, and like 3 trans women. So it was very much like you could kind of see what they were trying to do with all of that. So for me, it was definitely like this kind of weird thing, but you were meeting people who everyone started porn about the same time, where it's like, oh yeah, I've been in porn for 6 months now, been in here for 3 months, I'm from this part of the country, everyone's from somewhere else essentially. So we had people from like Texas. One of the other trans girls I was with was from Philly, and then there was another trans girl who I think was local to here, and basically everyone just burnt out other than me essentially, where one of the performers actually got attacked on Muni on the way to BART, and it was actually ruled a hate crime, I believe, and just really horrific. Got assaulted on Muni on the way to work. And the other girl, I can't remember her porn name, but she was from Philly. She's out here for 3 months and was basically like, I can't afford rent here. I'm eventually going to burn out, and just was like, okay, I'm just going to go back home. It's not really the thing. So there's just such a level of burnout there, and you just really see who's going to stick around the industry. And now there's some of the performers who I started working with who, have gone on to an AVNs, and so many of us have been nominated for all this stuff. So I can see how that set us up for this in a lot of good ways, because ultimately there you're just in a cam room. If you have a client, you're gonna have to make it happen on your own. And I think for me, it really made me have to focus on my own sexuality and really tap into what I can do and how to get into that headspace.
Hmm.
So I think that time at Kink was very good. But also, I think when you're in a system like that, and for me, like I started working there, and then they're like, "Oh, Chelsea, you're a dom, right?" And I'm like, "No, I was very clearly not." So in another level, it's just like, why are you having me in here when you had all these assumptions of me just because I'm a trans woman? So I
Like,
like hit,
stop, right? No.
yeah. So I hit that burnout, but like right when I started figuring out what all that stuff was is when we started making fucking Mystic, and when we went to New York to shoot with Bailey J. So I felt like I had other stuff going on other than just doing the kink thing. But I also feel like there were a lot of people who that becomes your life because they're running their company. At the time, they were running their company like a Silicon Valley kind of model, where we have a personal chef for you so you don't have to leave. We have a gym here. We have parties every night. Oh, we have a bar across the street that you can drink for half off. Oh, you can sleep here if you want. Just kind of endless to try to keep you in the building and keep you working. And in a lot of ways, it was really great. But I think it's the same thing with the Silicon Valley companies where you have to have some sort of work-life balance. And I think it's very hard to do that when your work is trying to give you everything and trying to motivate you to stay there.
I've never heard anybody make that connection, but I think that's why I like your podcast so much is because, and I've been wanting to talk to you about it for so long, is because after you've heard so many stories from other performers, now as you're speaking, you're actually like sort of digesting some of this information and presenting it in a really new way. Because thinking about the Armory as sort of like I mean, I lived across the street from Pixar. That's where we were making,
Yeah, yeah,
that's where we used to
basically.
be making all, now that I don't live there anymore, I could talk about it.
Yeah, definitely.
That we were basically making trouble film stuff right across the street from Pixar. And like thinking about that whole campus mentality of like the people who worked at, you like never saw Pixar employees in the neighborhood ever. They
Mhm.
just went in and out in their like little cars and like it took up most of the neighborhood, right?
Yeah,
Like, okay, well, that's kind of what the Armory was like
for
too.
sure.
It's a private space, it's gigantic,
It's
and
like
the
this
people,
historic building. Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
not safe to take Bart. Like as you said, like one of the performers like was hate crimed on the
yeah.
bus.
Yeah, it took some
So what do
commission.
people take their private drivers or Uber to the castle, to the Armory, and they get inside and they're like protected and safe and fed and like housed and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I mean, with my experience, I was unpaid,
Yeah.
unfed, given a lot of alcohol, and I got my ass beat in a way that I don't really feel was like fun or sexy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you're combining this whole like Silicon Valley culture
Yeah.
and BDSM,
You
yeah,
can't you
I
can't
feel like
take
you
that
can do
fuck it
that.
up with like what do they say like break it mental like the it's okay to break things mentality doesn't really work for porn.
No, I mean, I think it was a really important part of the scene here, especially during the
Yeah,
queer porn era, where it was like the other thing you could also do, or at
right.
least was bringing in some sort of money for at least some
Some
people.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was very important, but I feel like you really can't have that model overall. And I just feel like that's just too much power and um, centralization of porn that it's just like can get very, very messy.
Right. Completely. And it did inspire you to like make other things. So, you know, it's
Yeah.
clear to me like you were really inspired by like your introduction to the porn industry and camming and sex work to
Also, I feel
really
like
become a filmmaker.
also so much of the stuff at Kink by the time I was there was gone. Like
Right.
they were kind of out of the whole thing of bringing in these big porn performers and really letting them dictate what they wanted to do. Like I don't think Bobby Starr was working there anymore. Princess Donna was gone. So for me, like all the stuff that drew me in about the company was gone. So I was kind of like, okay, who are these people? I don't really care about them in a way, you know?
You know, Princess Donna is an old friend of mine, not even through work, just like through the scene or whatever. I should just
Yeah.
like find her for you.
Oh, I know I reached out to her recently, be like, hey, you really inspired so much of my
She's
sexuality.
awesome. I would say like if you really want to understand like Bay Area queer porn, like you have to understand that everybody who was working for mainstream porn in the Bay was queer as fuck. So they would
Yeah.
go to work at mainstream porn and then we would all party together at the end of the night. Like we were all in like these underground gangs together and stuff. So like
Yeah, I mean,
if you really want to talk about like where did queer porn come from, I would say it like came from like the Lexington Club and late night chats between like femme lesbian sex workers like Princess Donna and like me and like a bunch of other people who were around. Like we really wanted to see dirty femme sex like outside of that because Kink didn't do it right, sort of.
I
And he
think
was a
some of
performance.
Belladonna's stuff there was like, holy shit, this is
Oh God,
amazing.
I
But
know she's iconic. She's amazing.
yeah, I just feel like I honestly like got the end of the queer porn partying era because I moved here in 2013. So like
Hmm.
everyone was still here, but like I feel like it was maybe like the last few years of the whole partying era, because I mean, just hearing the stories about like 2010, 2011, like people are going so hard here, and there was like way more drug use, where I think I kind of caught the end of that, where I didn't see that much stuff. Like I feel
Yeah.
like it was definitely way more of a party before.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I have to say, I wasn't smoking that much weed until you showed up.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't smoke weed until I moved here, honestly. Like I barely
Which
smoked weed
is
when
so
I
it's
met.
weird. It's like we met and then we're like, let's just be stoners. Like, how did that happen?
I Ramsey Rodstein, that's how that happened.
Thank you.
That's exactly how that happened. Where it was like we were hanging out with him a lot, and then we're like, oh, this is
Oh,
great.
let's be stoners. Yeah, I have to say, like, for me, it was definitely about quitting drinking and like
Hmm.
any other drugs I had done, like in my early 20s. Like, weed just felt like a nice way to like harm reduce, I guess. But you know, what you don't get stoned before a scene though. How do you prepare for a scene? I'm gonna switch
Um,
gears just a little bit.
yeah. I really I've the last few years I've been really about working out, and I feel like that makes me feel physically prepared, because I just don't like in the middle of a scene where I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired. I just never want to have that happen ever again.
Hmm.
So I've been focusing a lot on like cardio and doing all that stuff. Like sexually, I have a butt plug in for like a month usually, something like that. And I do it like a few hours a day, probably 2 to 3. And yeah, sometimes there's like shorter turnaround. Like right now, I haven't been preparing, but I have about a week. So I feel like if I prepare by doing a butt plug for a few hours a day, I feel like I can prepare for a week turnaround. So yeah, that's usually my main stuff. And then the rest is just running around the city, getting your hair cut, manicure, brows, all the things kind of to get ready for a scene. And I feel like that's all just part of prep now. As much as anything else, like mentally or physically. Mentally, I meditate usually like shortly before the scene, maybe like 5 minutes before we start, and just take a few breaths and really just try to be fully in myself and just do all that. But yeah, I feel like it's just been so hard during the whole pandemic, just getting back into performance and just kind of being patient and realizing cancellations are going to happen and movies might take longer. But also, I just feel like it's so weird, because I feel like I don't know if you agree with this. I think last year is my best year in porn.
I was gonna say when I was thinking about everything you've done, I was just like you really rocked it during the pandemic in a way of just like you just like focused. There was a lot of focus for you, and like we learned how to stream live on Trouble Films and like had
Hmm.
some really interesting events and like yeah, and you ended up performing like a lot more than you thought you would. Would you
Yeah.
say like there was like what's like your okay, what do you think was like the best scene that you did during the pandemic?
Probably our East Bay Brats thing.
Which one?
The the force yeah, foursome scene with Ruby, Jupiter, and Lita.
Oh, the one we're
The
calling it's
pumping.
like pumped, the pumping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was honestly, I view everything in the pandemic leading to that point, honestly. Like everything, all the waiting, all that stuff. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the best thing. But just like looking back at last year now, like the pandemic made me actually have like perspective on everything. And I feel like I have a work-life balance for my first time. And I think a lot of that has to do with like going to therapy and stuff, where like before, I feel like instead of going to therapy and actually getting help, I just poured it all into my work, which it worked for a while. Like I made some really good movies, I think, but mentally I couldn't enjoy any of the success. Like I don't know if you got this vibe off me, but everything I was doing before was like, okay, I have to do this because this is what I'm expected to do. Where I'm like, if I don't get nominated for this award, it's because I'm fucking up. I need to work harder, all that stuff. Where even when the stuff happened, I couldn't enjoy it, where it was always on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this last like since the pandemic, I've actually been able to enjoy things now and actually be like, especially this last year, like every real life performance last year, we got nominated for AVN. Were nominated for best series, so that's 3 films for East Bay Brads. Fucking Against Fat, no, Fetish Fuck Dolls was nominated for best BDSM, and then the stuff with Why Not happened. Winning that was crazy, and having like full closure on that whole saga. Um, the shit with Lily Cade finally ended, and yeah, the From Hollywood Love getting nominated. Like, just looking at all that shit, that's like, it's hard for me to almost figure out that's like during this pandemic, you probably had your best year. It's hard for me to kind of grasp that in a way, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like my whole thing before was always like, you just need to go more. If I got anything like an AVN nomination, it was like, okay, that's what I was expected to do. So now I can actually enjoy stuff because I feel like I have that work-life balance. I don't know if you've seen the difference from me.
Well, I was gonna just, I mean, obviously, like, not gonna like divulge all of like our like personal shit on in the middle of
Yeah,
a
I'm like
podcast.
going high therapy shit right now. I'm like,
I'm all like all the times that we've been like sobbed into each other's soft bodies about like this, that, or the other
yeah,
porn drama. But yeah, I can say that like, and like, I think I don't need to ask you why, because I heard from what you were saying, it was just like really like tapping into your mental health and your emotional well-being, and like having a moment to really consider how therapy and meditation play a part in like your well-being as a porn performer and as a sex worker. I think that that's really profound information that I hope anybody listening to this who is a performer can take home with them, because that's like,
mm-hmm.
to me, it's just really important to take that time. And yes, like, I mean, I think I see this with performers all the time. I've been doing this for 20 years or
Mm-hmm.
more now. And like, what I'll see is like people will like have that scene or that moment where they realize like, oh, it's more than just a few shoots. Like, this is my career.
Yeah,
And then once you adopt that mentality, everything starts to feel way more important than it used to. So things like award shows, nominations,
mm-hmm.
like getting the attention of like a magazine or something. Like, these were, before I ever got nominated for an AVN, I never even thought about it.
Yeah. My goal was to get nominated for one in my whole career. So when
I
all
never
this
even
started
thought about
happening,
it. Like,
yeah,
I just didn't. I never, like, I think I personally maybe entered porn without even thinking about like the fame aspect of anything. Like,
mm-hmm.
I just kind of wanted to make a website, right? Like, I just wanted to do it.
Yeah,
But like, yeah, I've seen this pattern where people are like, oh, like, the things I'm doing are getting noticed and they're a big deal and I'm getting acknowledged. What's next for me? And then all of a sudden I have to starts to
yeah,
appear in your mind. You're like, oh, I have to do this. I have to do that. For me, it was like, oh, like I have to like, do a boy girl scene, or like like I have
mm-hmm.
to get like the attention of like the BBW, like fandom or whatever, even though it just goes against what I'm doing.
Yeah,
And it's also not what I set out to do. I didn't set out to win. I just set out
yeah,
to make art and to survive. So yes, I think like I've seen a progression in you. Um, like from that close perspective of like we've been together in moments where like one of us like didn't win the category, or like we like ran out of money on tour, and it's just
yeah,
like one of us spirals. We've both done it, and it's just like,
yeah,
what do
for
we do
sure.
in that moment except just try and breathe and like have that like meditation moment where you can like bring yourself back down to earth,
Yeah.
because porn, if anything, has a way of like feeding your ego in certain ways.
Hmm.
And especially once people start to get to notice you, that ego starts to give you little expectations and things
Yeah.
like, but I'm proud of everything you've done. Like you've worked for Nika Noel. You've worked for like
Yeah.
all these mainstream companies, um, like you've been to some wild places.
Yeah.
Like
It's
you've been in a
in what?
You've made porn in a house that became the center of like a
Yeah.
law entanglement in like
Yeah. And
Martha's Vineyard. Like, did you ever think you'd end up in Martha's Vineyard of all places making porn?
honestly, my
Or
whole
Nantucket? Where were you?
yeah, it's Martha's Vineyard. Honestly, the amount of porn I made in New England, I never in my life, like being from where I'm from, I never thought I was gonna like my art goals were like maybe someday I can screen something in Chicago, which we're screening in Chicago on Saturday. So guess that's happening. But like that was where I thought like the limit was. So like when I came out here and started doing all this, when Nika Noel reached out to me, my immediate reaction was like, oh, I'll be on like a one DVD thing where I'm like one out of 8 trans girls, and I'll be like low billing. That's terrific. But then I show up and they're like, no, you're the star of the movie. You're in 3 scenes. So I'm like, okay. And like I felt fairly overwhelmed when I found that out, but I'm like, okay. Um, but that movie was just so great, and working with Magdalene, it was such a great experience. And just that Nika like actually got like I think they're the best for writing for me and just actually know like where I'm coming from and stuff and the porn I wanted to do. Like I think I also expanded what I wanted to do because it was obviously mainstream, more wholesome, but like I kind of like the dichotomy between doing that and like really extreme explicit BDSM. It was all very like within my wheelhouse and like what I felt comfortable with. Where like the whole TS porn world, I think I got put there because they're like, you're a trans woman and you're conventionally pretty, so we can make money off of you. And even like with all this shit, when Groovy was all mad at me, they're like, well, you're a very talented performer, so you're probably going to be successful and you're really pretty. And it's just like very strange to
He's like,
get
we
that.
hate you, but you're good.
Yeah, right. Like even during all of that. And it was just like so bizarre for me because I'm just like,
Come on, dude.
just when I came in here though, like I don't know, I didn't expect to be viewed that way. That everyone was like, "Oh, you're gonna be a thing," and there's all these expectations kind of people had in me. I feel like that I didn't come out here having. So I think it just made it very different, and I feel like Nika really gave me a place that I could do mainstream porn that I felt comfortable with, and I feel like her style of like ethical porn or whatever you want to call it, like I feel like that's what Transensual has continued with Ricky, and I feel like that's what Transfix did, and every company that's kind of making money and winning awards off of that, I feel like is kind of copying Nika's style, at least in a way, or in Transensual's case is still using their writing. So it's like, yeah, I feel like I was very lucky to be part of that whole thing that kind of became what mainstream porn is now, where it's, you know, this kind of like sensual stuff is now what mainstream porn is. So I feel like it's really lucky to be a part of that, but I never felt comfortable in the regular trans porn world because none of my influences were there. I never wanted to be a TS porn star. Like
But did you
none of
ever you tried it out though, right? Didn't don't you
yeah, they were giving me opportunities, but like I didn't know what to do with it because I'm just like, this isn't my porn world. Like even within it, I was performing like femmes I saw in queer porn. So like I was basically just doing like a
Oh.
cheap Susie Q imitation. And like talking like that. And it's like that doesn't work in mainstream trans porn. Where
Would
I'm
you say
like,
that that's like your like Your weirdest industry experience was like working for mainstream TS.
Yeah. Yeah, because I didn't even know of that world. So they would try to reference girls at me, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. And then they explain her to me. I'm like, well, she's straight. So why would I want anything to do with that? Or even if they were gay, it was like very much like, oh, I just top cis women and that's it. And I'm like, that's not really relatable to me. So,
Yeah.
so like, yeah, my whole world was definitely always more the whole like Stoya, even Sin Sage, like that whole realm where that's how I viewed all my opportunities, where I'm like, what were the sites that these girls were shooting for? Mastoya, obviously, her first site was God's Girls. And then, like with Sin Sage, it's like, oh, yeah, they worked with Nika too. And it's like the same type of films where all the trans porn films I'm in look exactly like the straight porn films from Mile High or the gay porn films. They all look the same, but because they were all being shot by the same cast and same directors and stuff, like I feel like I've gotten to perform with, you know, the best directors and like the best like talent, where I don't feel like there's anything in my career where I'm like, this what if of, oh, what if I got to work with like this person or this person, what would happen? Like I feel like I kind of got my whole ride and I feel really good about it. Like I think particularly having like the whole come up when I was, really young, like 24, when I got to be like, oh wow, I'm nominated for all this stuff. And then almost have the second thing happen this last year in 2021, where it was just the most eventful year and getting awards and getting nominated for stuff. And yeah, I feel like it's really just truly lucky to have these like two kind of peaks, I feel like.
Yeah. And, I really don't think that it's over for you at all. I think that in a lot of ways it's just begun. Like every accomplishment is always sort of, the opening of a new chapter. That's
Mm-hmm.
sort of how I have found porn to be is, I told you I didn't think I'd ever get noticed by AVN, but then I was like immediately after I
Yep.
made a film. So I was like, oh, I didn't even know that that was a goal that I wanted to have. So that,
Mm-hmm.
like, what do like, where do you go from there? So I guess I'm curious, like you said, like, oh, you did like Stoya worked for God's Girls, you got to go for God's Girls, one of the reasons why you had like a frustrating time with Lily Kidd and other people like her is because, you know, you saw people like Sage or Stoya or Ella Darling or someone like working for Philly Films. You're like, I want to work for Philly Films. I'm a lesbian. And like having those gatekeeping moments sort of be, these decision making moments for
Mm-hmm.
you. So I mean, from my point of view, that's what like the Lily Kate thing is. That's kind of like where it is birthed from. Is like Drew DeVoe. Your interest in making lesbian porn was very sincere
Mm-hmm.
and genuine, and coming from your own personal lesbianism and your queerness.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that being said, like I mean, like so porn studios kind of get birthed every day. Like is there like someone or something now, like some studio? You did say like I feel pretty good about where I'm at, but like is there like any new like projects or genres or things that are happening in the porn industry right now that you're like looking at like, ooh, that looks like fun. I want to try that.
I just want to shoot for more BDSM companies. That's it. But it's also like we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. Like we literally have a shoot next week, and we're like we can't book it until like last minute because who knows what's gonna happen. So I feel like
I
there's so
tested
much.
negative today. We'll see.
Yeah, right. Like it's just so hard to know right now. Like kind of even if it's like, oh, there's a company on the East Coast I'm hoping to work with. If they hit me up tomorrow and they're like, do you want to get on a plane? I don't know. So I feel like so much is up in the air right now. I think like just where the studio model is though, like when I got into this industry, if you wanted to shoot lesbian porn, you had to have a studio book you. Now you can do whatever you want on your own, basically, and have as good of content. I mean, the last time we went into the dungeon, I shot on my iPhone, and that was as good as our actual camera.
Yes, it's very true.
So, so it's just like there's not these gatekeepers anymore being like, oh, this is the porn you have to shoot, and this is the porn you can't shoot. And if we decide you don't have a career, you don't have a career. So I think it's just changed so much. And also, like when I was shooting all this mainstream porn, our porn that we were shooting on our own was getting as much like award attention and as much screening as attention as the mainstream porn I was doing. Like I was in New England shooting one of these movies with Nika, and it was really really hard, and we thought we had like a great movie, and I don't think it ended up getting nominated for anything, but the emails I was answering during was for the first fetish fuck dolls during the whole time, and that movie got nominated for all this stuff. So it's just like you never really know what you're working on and what's going to get nominated and what's going to, do well. Also, like XOXOX, I think that's the best edited movie I ever did. Love the music on it. And it's like, it just never did what it should have. Like, I'm glad it got into Berlin and it did that. But, you know, you have some movies that you're like, oh, that's just whatever. And it's still touring and it's still going around the world now. So you truly never have any idea.
I would say that XOXOX is a film festival piece that's really kind of ephemeral, like in the sense that like you can't really pin down what it's about,
Yeah.
you know? It's vaguely about like Vegas maybe, or like hugging and kissing. I don't know, but
I think it's
I've
about the
noticed
music.
that
The music's
in
so
in
good.
my career, like movies like Lesbian Curves have always traditionally sold better than a movie like Roulette because you know what's in it.
That's true.
So I feel like that explains why XOXOX is like it's this beautiful film that we made together, and like editing it was really fun. We did all these overlays and experimental things, and
It took so
it's
long too.
the noise music background soundtrack is just so killer. Like
Oh no, that's
um
the KT Spit one. That's
yeah,
Central
I
Pop
mean it's
Music. Yeah.
everything. It's like yeah, it's a beautiful piece. But I mean, some things are just, I mean, do you know? Here's a question. Like, do you know when you're like making like a piece for like art or like a piece for like your rent? Do you feel
Um,
like there's a divide for you? Like,
I
do you
mean,
make content or are you always making art?
I feel like it's just like I just have different aesthetics. Like BDSM porn. I mean, I always had shots super straightforward. Honestly, what we're screening in Chicago is honestly a mix of both our styles of BDSM porn and art porn in one. So I think it's just like, particularly going to festivals like Berlin, like, I feel like you learn what's going to be like inside the theater and what the feel is going to be, and that you have to edit it in the right way. So it's, what you're comfortable with there. And like, you have to have the audio down. And just like that whole experience is so different than just someone watching it on their laptop to masturbate.
Yeah, I will say that's how I know if something is gonna go in a film festival or not, is like if I put my headphones on and it sounds good, then I'm like, okay, I'm okay with this going to a theater because because like with DIY porn and like the weird kinky art stuff we make, you just never know.
Truly. And I feel like having that experience is like when you're a band and you're like playing a big festival, because it's just a different audience and you kind of have to understand that and
And
treat
our
it that
fans,
way.
our audience, our fans totally get it.
Yeah.
But sometimes when we show it to brand new people, they're like, I can't hear anything. I'm like, I know.
I just love, like, yeah, those festivals in Europe are just so special. And I'm just so glad that that's part of our life. And honestly, like, I was feeling so burnt out on porn before I went to my first Berlin. And then I went, and yeah, that was one of the biggest moments in my life, just seeing stuff like Fucking Against Fascism and just like really experiencing what queer porn screenings could be and what they are in Berlin and across Europe. I feel like it just really changed everything. Also, I mean, our first time going to Amsterdam, like I felt so almost separated from anything with my own culture until we went there, because I'm from a super conservative place in Holland, Michigan. So like my sex work and love of marijuana and all these other things felt so separated from who I am and my culture. And then we go there and it's all weed everywhere. It's everyone talking about like being anti-fascist and stuff.
Mhm.
And everyone loves porn and there's sex work everywhere. And like even at the fancy hotel we went to, like there were sex workers walking back from a hotel room and the guy's just, yeah, it's Amsterdam. This is what it is. This is what the Netherlands is. And I'm just like, how can it be that the place that I'm actually from has all these things that are like my essence essentially? Like I've never felt more comfortable any place in the world before, as being a sex worker, being gay, like just all the things. And I feel like, yeah, you were there with me during that time where
Yeah,
it
I shot the
literally,
orgy.
I mean, no, but even
I
our
remember
first,
you being really nervous before we got there. Like
yeah,
that was one of the little spirally moments that we've had together was like, oh my God, we're going to Amsterdam. We're in like, it's hard. It's hard to travel on a budget, right? So like we show up tired, we show up hungry, we show up and we realize there's like
oh yeah,
mice.
my phone was broken.
Our phone, someone's phone is broken.
Mine
Someone
was.
else's, my debit card's not working. Like, and all of a sudden, like, we have to find a hotel room at 3 o'clock in the morning.
It was like so much drama, but then like the
Like, thank
next
God
day,
we weren't alone. Like, that's all I think about is like, thank God it wasn't just me or just you alone in these situations.
yeah,
Where like we didn't speak the language and like had to go find a place to sleep in the middle of the night. Like, and I wouldn't replace it for the world. I like nothing could take that trip away from me.
that next day, that screening, that's my favorite art thing of my life. That
Um,
we did that, and then it was like completely full of people, and there were like people watching through the windows and at the porn.
and we were able to donate like mostly all of the money.
Yeah, we were able to, we
Um,
got our like guarantee, and then we donated the rest of the money to Trans Lifeline. It was
yep.
just like the coolest thing.
And we got fed and like, yeah, we were taken care of aside from the hotel room thing. But
Yeah.
um,
Um,
yeah, I would say that Amsterdam is definitely probably like the most awesome experience ever that we
yeah.
that I've had like in this career.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. It
it
just,
just it almost didn't feel like work, but we like shot a whole film there. And like
yeah,
that's when you know it's good. It's just like through all of the work that you're actually doing, you're really working hard. But then when I look back at the trip, I'm like, yeah, we made a whole film uh, on this one, and we did had our best screening ever on this one.
yeah.
And actually, all I can really remember is like walking around the canals, like smoking weed, and like wondering how many people like fell in the canals every year. You know?
Yeah, and like going to Fibu and like,
Yeah, like the food and like just wandering around and the lights and like you almost forget like how much work goes into some of the scenes because you also probably like trained for weeks to make sure that your body was ready
yeah.
for the 2 scenes or 3 scenes that you did do that week, and like you notoriously don't like solo scenes, but you committed to them,
I
like
don't know where it, I don't know where that solo scene is, but it's somewhere.
we have one of them. We have one of them. But
Yeah.
yeah, we did lose one, didn't we?
No, I have it still. I just don't, I hate editing solo scenes of myself. It's like double masturbation. But yeah, I just feel like that trip, it just made me realize so much about, yeah, just myself and just all of that. And just honestly, like one of the most meaningful experiences in my life. Yeah, I just feel so lucky to have had that. And Yeah, just so crazy finding out that's literally the city that I'm from, and then all the stuff around it being this like perfect experience. Because there's so many cities I've gone to where I'm like, it's fine. Like, if I found out I was German and completely from Berlin, I would be like, oh, that's nice. Berlin's a nice city, but just all my experiences with Amsterdam and my comfort level there, just really crazy. It's like bringing a tear to my eye right now. Because it really does feel like I felt alienated from my whole culture and my whole life, like from all that, because being in such a conservative place and then finding out that that's not really what it is and that's not really who you are. It just
Yeah,
really,
it's very interesting that Holland, Michigan doesn't have any of the open-mindedness that Amsterdam has, that
yeah,
Holland has.
they're the ones who fled because they're like, it's getting too secular. So
All
like
the
that's
wholesome
literally the
people.
story why. So
Yes.
that's also why it's one of the most depressed places, because everything's just repression and being like, don't take up space, don't take up space.
And you're
So
like, I'm going to take up space. I'm going to take up space. I'm going to take up all of the space.
yeah, I think going there helped me. It's just being like, okay, this is actually where you're from. You're not a weirdo. Most people there, like talking to Esperanza, who's from the Netherlands, they're like, oh yeah, I used to work at a coffee shop and then I decided, oh, I want to do sex work. I'm like, you have the most possible Dutch story of like being like coffee shop to porn sex to porn pipeline. Feels very good.
What other jobs do you think you could have?
I would probably be doing something like of long like venue management and probably setting up this same sort of things that I do now. Like instead
Right.
of my screenings, it'd be probably whatever band or whatever thing. But honestly, I have no clue where I'd be without sex work, because I sure as hell wouldn't be living in San Francisco. As a concert promoter, I don't think I would have any sort of budget to do that. So I don't know. I think I'm just very lucky to just where everything is right now, and just excited about the future. But I think we have so many things that we're going to shoot in the next few years, and
Yeah, like
hopefully
what do you want to do next? What do you want to do next?
I just want to do more of the same because I feel like I can actually enjoy it now.
What's the next project that what are you currently working on?
Chelsea submits two. We
And what
shot
is in it?
one um
Storage Slut
storage slot that's screening in Chicago on Saturday.
is going to be in Chelsea Smith's too.
Yeah.
And then
A scene we're shooting
hopefully,
on Wednesday, hopefully COVID pending. And
hopefully,
then some other sort of BDSM scene. And yeah, there's gonna be another BDSM movie out.
if you could
Maybe something after
travel,
that.
okay, if you could travel anywhere in the United States to make something, where would it be right now?
The United States. I would really like for us to do a Vegas trip.
Yeah.
I know that's probably gonna happen, but
No, it'll happen. We'll go to
yeah,
Vegas.
I'm sure we
Just,
will
you know,
get COVID down. Yeah, I went to Vegas a few weeks ago just for a vacation, and yeah, it was very
and
nice. But I'm also very happy to kind of get back to a porn trip again. We haven't done a porn trip in so long. Also, I really want us to do an East Bay Brad's road trip that Ruby Riots talked about on here. I think we should
yes,
all go down to the Pink Dungeon in LA and stay at
yes,
a hotel and do like a slumber party thing for like a
yes.
day.
I really think that the East Bay Brats do LA. It would be like the best movie ever.
It would be so good for like the fifth one. And
But
then,
at this point in my career, I'm just like, let's just make whatever is going to be fun for us to make. Like,
yeah,
let's do a road trip movie or a vacation movie or
yeah.
like I clearly want to get out of the house so bad. My mind is in fantasy land right now. I'm like, let's go somewhere.
I can totally agree with that. So yeah, I think that's probably like the next thing of just doing a West Coast trip again. Probably us going somewhere and shooting something, just because it's been so
Yeah.
long, honestly, like literally since AVN in 2020. So yeah, so I think that's kind of how I'm feeling about the future. Just hoping we can get back to some normalcy, but also realizing we have to be patient with COVID stuff happening anywhere, and also
Mhm.
realizing, oh, we might be stranded for 2 weeks somewhere. So It's all kind
True
of part of it.
story.
Yeah.
Okay, and I have some reflection questions for you.
Okay.
And especially like with you hosting this podcast, you've had a chance to talk to so many porn stars, some of which who have deeply influenced you. Like you just spoke with Stoya.
Yeah. It's crazy interviewing
What?
your idol.
I know, tell me about it. I'm interviewing one of my idols right now. It's incredible.
You can't compare me to Soya. Don't do that to me. Don't
You
do that
changed
to
my
me.
life. I
I
realized
understand.
I was already doing porn when you showed up in my life, but I started something else entirely when I met you. So,
That is true. That is true.
and it just has everything to do with really like I don't think I don't think I ever said like, oh, Trouble Films is like a blatantly femme for femme place, like until you and I started making porn together and being like, you know what, like we could work to find more butch people, but we could also just make like we could also make like queer porn with all of these femmes and like make it in a way that like from our point of view really is
Yeah.
fun. So like there's just like certain things like that, like really just like making stuff that like vibes with like our identities and like yeah,
Hmm.
I think our friendship has really inspired me as a filmmaker and a performer. um but like what you know people look up to you this same now the same
Yeah.
way that you look up to Stoya and Sasha Grey.
Yes.
Okay, you're like the next generation of legendary porn icons that and people already look up to you.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for them? Because, this is one of your questions. There's so much turnover in porn.
Hmm.
What do you think? Like, how did you get to where you are with your staying power? What
I
advice would you give to the people who look up to you and want to be like you?
self-produce. Produce with you and your friends and try to make it sustainable. Cut down the overhead as much as possible. And that's how you can keep a porn career because people are going to book you and then people aren't going to book you and you really can't wait for other studios. So I think just doing whatever you can on your own and just trying to work that up. I think that's the biggest thing, whether it's shooting your webcam shows, whether it's shooting on an iPhone, just truly whatever you can do. I think is really, really important and kind of not wait for someone to give you a break to be like, oh, I'm going to be a porn star because of this. Like, also, as I was saying earlier, the stuff we were working on our own was getting more critical acclaim than the mainstream work I was doing. So you just really never know. So I think just always work on your own stuff 100%.
And what's the best advice some of your icons have given you, like Stoya?
I don't know if they ever really truly gave me any advice.
Not
Um,
directly, but have you learned anything from talking to so many porn stars on this platform, on this podcast right here? What
yeah, I
have
think I
you
learned a
learned?
lot. I think I just learned more that everyone had there's just so many reasons why people get into porn and so many reasons why people are in it still and their intentions for it. I think interviewing Stoya and talking to her that she doesn't really know who gave her the deal at Digital Playground, who really discovered her and was like, oh, this is the girl. I think there's just so much stuff in this industry that's like kind of by chance. Like, I don't know who hired me at Kink Live. I think it was Miss Berlin. It might have not been though. You never know. Or like, what were the chances that we were going to meet because I gave Crashpad 10 people I wanted to work with. What are the chances that that was going to be the thing? I think we probably would have linked up in some way, but I don't think it would have been like that. Like that was my first porn scene ever. Like
Well,
if it was
I
with
don't,
someone
here's one
else.
thing that the world probably doesn't know is that we were chatting on G Chat in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
just like as friends for like a
Uh-huh.
year before that thing even happened.
Was it that long beforehand?
Maybe not, but like I just remember like my ex-husband would fall asleep and I'd still be chatting.
But like, yeah, I just feel like there's so many things just by chance in this industry. And like, what if I didn't have a short cam that I didn't see Jisley? Like, like there's just so many of these little things. I think
Mhm.
in any entertainment industry, and you just never really know kind of what's going to happen. So I think there's just so much by chance. And I think particularly talking to Stoya yesterday, it's where it wasn't yesterday, it was released, I think yesterday. But yeah, you just never really know. So I think it's just, you know, there's so much by chance and you just kind of have to trust it. But yeah, there's just so many different stories why people get into porn. And that's, I think, what I learned, just to kind of appreciate everything that has gone well, and just also realize, it wasn't always meant to be. These are all just kind of small chances, and you never really know who took these chances on you. That's why I really want to interview Miss Berlin and be like, were you the person who approved me for Kink Live? Because if they're not, I'm going to have so many questions.
Like, who on earth got me this
Yeah,
job?
right?
That's a really fun and interesting thing that I've learned about porn since listening to your podcast is just it is very random.
Yeah.
It is so chaotic sometimes. And you just kind of have to remember that it's random.
Yeah.
And that like casting decisions get made randomly. It's not because they hate you.
Yeah.
It's
You
just
just never
because
know.
something else happened.
Yeah.
It's literally it. It's like something like a fly hit the wall and plans changed. Like
Yeah.
it's so random. I guess I don't think I would change that about the porn industry because there's also so much. I love some of the spontaneity and chaos, especially
Mhm.
of like award shows and everybody's shuffling around or like, wait, that person won? I have no idea who that is. Like
Yeah.
that's always the wild thing for me is like, oh, this woman is at the top of her game, and I'm like, who on earth is
Yeah.
that?
That the industry is so vast that there's just
Yeah.
always, like, at AVN, you're always learning about new parts of porn or
Yep.
places that you didn't know people were
Yep.
shooting stuff. And it's
It,
just,
there is no one center of gravity in the industry. Like there are 100 centers of gravity, and
yeah.
like you just really do have to keep that in mind, like when you're entering the industry. Um, I would actually want to talk about this question because I've been on your podcast before, and this
Yes.
question terrifies me. And I'm always like, why does she end the podcast with this question? So I'm going to ask you about the question, and then I'm also going to ask you the question. If
Okay.
you could magically change one thing in porn, what would it be? Now, don't answer this question.
I answer the question like every time, basically, because everyone else has to kill time. So I'm like, I have it ready.
You're ready. Okay, but
Yeah.
before you answer yours, okay, you've literally asked every single
Yes.
person that's been on this podcast this question. So, according to everyone on the podcast, what are the things that need to magically change in porn?
Um, Someone said there would never be consent violations on set. That's a very good one.
Yeah,
Ending transphobia in porn, ending racism in porn, ending
very
fat
good.
phobia in porn, ending stigmatization against tattoos in porn. Um, yeah, I think those are like the main ones, or some version thereof.
Hmm. So, if you could magically change one thing in porn, what would it be?
I would speed it up 5 years. I think in 5 years, there's going to be a few directors that are going to be left because they're really creative and doing positive things. I think those are going to be people like Brie Mills. I think it's going to be people like Ricky Greenwood. I think it's going to be stuff like Deeper um, and other performer directors. But I think most studios are going to be gone. And I think that's going to be good. I think there are some issues with content trade that are obviously coming up now in Vegas. And I think that's kind of to be expected. But I think overall, just equity wise for the industry, I think there's going to be more things like East Bay Brats. And I think there's going to be, I think the content trade is going to be the default setting in the industry. And I think that's going to be better for it because as a performer, you're going to have way more control of your career. Also, I think eventually the whole agent model in LA is going to be gotten rid of because I think most of these girls are going to realize they can make way more money just doing an OnlyFans or mini vids or whatever other thing that is going to be around at the time. So that's my hope. I just want this industry to be sped up like 5 years.
Yeah, because right now we're all, because the main problem with the sort of like people just self producing and all that stuff, it is great. And like, I owe my livelihood to having my own membership site. Like,
Mhm.
you can't replace that with studio success. You just can't.
Nope.
Um,
I feel like studio success
it's
comes and
just,
goes too.
it's just so messy right now. The platforms are so messy right now that, yeah, the best thing that we could do is just kind of like wait for this, wait for this part to be over.
Yeah, I think
And like, if it's gonna be OnlyFans, great. Let's make OnlyFans better because like, yeah, that future looks like, a decentralized internet
yep.
with like, you know, blockchain and digital downloads and like, accountability threads between places like OnlyFans and the people who use them. Because that's inevitably how content trade works, is
Yeah,
through distribution.
I think what really needs to happen is, especially in like place like Vegas, I think they need to come up with a free testing thing because industry testing right now in Vegas seems like a effing mess. It seems like there's just too much content trade going on in some ways. People are shooting 5 sets and like are on 5 sets in like 4 days or 3 days. And it's just like without a real testing thing that's free and always accessible for everyone, I think you're just going to see the continuation of there being testing issues in Vegas. And I think that's just kind of one of the growing pains of um, content trade right now. But it makes me
Mhm.
really hopeful about the future of the industry. Just that, like talking to Roxy Moth, like she moved to Vegas, and it's like, okay, you're here. You try to be a porn star now. Basically, do a bunch of content trade, build up your site. In a lot of ways, that's amazing because before that didn't happen. Like you couldn't. You moved to California to do porn like I did, and it was like, well, I hope studios still cast me and I can get some gigs, or I'm kind of fucked. Because if it wasn't for Trouble Films and even the other companies I was working for, like I wouldn't have had anything here. I would have just been camming. So I think it's so different.
The world, I've realized now, like, and if anyone's curious really how Trouble Film started, I just woke up one day and gave what I was doing a name.
Yeah.
It's it's a studio in concept only. Really, I'm a performer who's doing content trade, and then when I have money, I fund other performers. Like that's what we do. We save up money to hire people. We crowdfund for our film projects. If some of us, I don't think I've ever like crowdfunded, but I've
Oh no.
definitely done customs, which are, I get paid ahead
Yeah.
of time. That's kind of like crowdfunding.
Yeah, I feel like also we're
you
like taking
know
in performers content too. So we have people like Sensage
uh-huh,
or
uh-huh,
what I'm
uh-huh,
doing or
uh-huh.
Lida. And I just feel like it's really a thing for performers now where if you do have the ability to make your own films and are looking for a platform, I feel like that's what Trouble Films has really done, where we've almost worked as a
Right.
label during all of this.
Or most so more so, what I'm thinking is like I've tried, it's not big enough to just be like, oh, like, if you want to do this, come on in. Although I want to say yes to everybody, right? Like, and we have curated some amazing things that have had nothing to do with us. But if anybody is interested in this, team up, find your creative soulmate. And like,
Yeah.
it is hard to do all of this stuff alone. And like, Trouble Films is a studio in name only. It just exists because we say it exists. And like, so like anybody out there can say like, hey, like this is my studio, this is my label, this is my record label, this is what I make, and like,
Mhm.
do you want to come collaborate with my quote unquote brand, right? Like, do you
Yeah.
want to come collaborate? And like, because porn is so caught up in like commercialism and capitalism and sex
Yeah, at least
work.
North American porn.
Yeah, like to think about it more on an artistic level, like, yes, bands need to make money, artists need to make money, but at the end of the day, how they make money is by collaborating with other artists and other bands and like going on tour and like showing their work and creating connections. You don't ever need approval from another label. That's the
Yep.
whole point. So, like, yeah, that's always been my advice for everyone. And that's what I think, like, at the end of this podcast, at the end of this day, like, looking back at your career, like, obviously, like, consent, that I'm not talking about consent or sex, but
Hmm.
for you, like, you know, hearing no from someone else has never stopped you
Yeah.
from doing what you needed to do for yourself.
Yeah.
And while you've been in moments where you felt like the expectations were going to rule over you, the porn you make and the performances that you do have always been self-directed.
Yeah.
Um, you've always been so clear about what you want to make and the kind what you want to make and
Yeah.
the kind of porn star that you want to be. That like you are a very clear role model for people coming to this industry trying to figure out how to sustain themselves,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
I think that like you've really shown that it takes a lot of work. You've never stopped camming.
No, definitely
You've
not.
taken vacations, you've taken breaks, but you have been a cam worker for probably 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. It was 10 years, I think, like to the month of winning the Why Not Cam Award. So
Yeah.
that was a really good full
You're
circle
not
there.
just sitting around waiting for someone to cast
Definitely
you in
not.
their next trans romantic movie.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, if you had waited around for my next project or Nika's next project or whatever, nothing would have ever happened to you.
For
It's
sure.
you who reached out to me and said, hey, Fucky Mystic was great. Do you want to do another thing? Here's my idea.
I don't even remember the
I don't know what we did
I
next at
don't know
all. What
either.
is it?
I have no idea what. I never remember that happening. I just remember us starting to shoot Submissive Mixtape too. Submissive Mixtape. I was just like,
Is that
oh,
what it
okay.
was? Yes.
Like I think there was some conversation, but like I didn't really.
Submissive Mixtape is amazing. Amazing. Like being able to see queer BDSM from the submissive's point of view, like really like getting the chance to like worship the dom and like really see what's happening.
Yeah.
Like you really put your foot down in queer BDSM moment right there.
Yeah. It's
For
just all the
sure.
porn I want to shoot at kink.com, and they just were like, you can't do that. So, but
Listen, not all porn stars are inspired by spite, but some of us are.
yeah, I mean, I just wanted to shoot it. I don't care who was gonna shoot it. And that's kind of how I felt with like all my stuff. Like when the shit with Philly Films was so crazy and they're like, well, you need to talk to our CEO and we need to like trick him. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And then
Uh-uh.
the trench coat opportunity came up, and that was like literally my dream to have my porn next to like Stoya's work and like all this porn that I was really stoked about. That wasn't just like, okay, this is
Yep.
just trans or this is
You
just
didn't give up.
lesbian. Yeah.
You found
So
another way. You found another way. And honestly, what could like there's no way like some like male owned company like trying to make like lesbian porn for the male gaze is going to be a better opportunity than Trenchcoat.
yeah, for
And
sure.
like what happened with Trenchcoat is you made royalties off of your movie.
Yeah, that was
Like you didn't just get
terrific.
cast, they like took your whole movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say
You were
knowing
their trans lesbian content. Like they didn't have anything else.
knowing their rate, Philly Films, yeah, it would have been the same for like doing 3 scenes for them. And like I didn't have to do anything. I just like sent them the files and then they put
Uh,
them up. So that was great. But Yeah, I think this is a pretty good spot to end it. I think that's kind of the overall arch of my career of just like, even if these companies don't want to do these things right now where they're like, oh, this is hard, just do it yourself and believe in yourself, even if you don't feel like you can. And then ultimately, when you get your work life balance in order, that's when stuff starts going right. Because last year, I feel like I had the best work life balance. Like I had weekends for the first time in a very long time. And then it all kind of worked out. So,
Yeah, you're a model for how to overcome sex worker burnout and like to keep it professional. And I do hope that people have taken all the wisdom that you've imparted just throughout this podcast and this episode in particular. And I'm so glad we didn't devolve into total giggles. Like, happy 420, we made it
yeah.
through.
Where can you tell everyone your links so they can follow you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, if you want, you can just go to links.courtneytrouble.com and you'll get set up with my OnlyFans, my Twitter, and of course, the various websites that I run. I am the wizard behind the curtain for chelseasubmits.com.
Yes.
So I would love to promote chelseasubmits.com in this fine podcast where you can find all of the performances that we just talked about with Chelsea. You can find at
Yes, you
chelseasubmits.com.
can.
And all of the other things that we haven't talked about, you can also find there. If that's not enough, you can go to troublefilms.com where Chelsea and I have been curating queer porn and rad, slutty BDSM, and even some straight stuff.
Yeah.
All with an indie DIY slant, all made by sex workers because
Mhm.
we are both sex workers, and that's why we stand out. That's what makes us special. So Chelsea, people can find you in the next episode of this
Yeah,
podcast.
you can find me there. My Twitter is at ChelseaPo666, and then my IG is at fake ChelseaPo. Well, thank you for spending your 420 with me, and I thanks everyone
As
else
I
for
do
spending your
every
420.
year.
I know, right? This is the first time in a long time we haven't had a movie release this day. So
I hope you'll have me back next year. Maybe
yeah,
we'll do a 420 special about
for
stoner
sure.
porn next year.
All right, bye everyone.
Yes, bye everyone.